And welcome to our next installment of this very unique kind of chapter. We'll have more like this coming up, but this, of course, is the other element of the Torah, which has to do with legal issues, with divine law, and sort of an interesting concept of the fact that here we have an opportunity that the Torah essentially says that it is possible to determine God's will, which is not a small thing to think about if you think about it. And clearly that is a major distinction between various religions, is that in Judaism, at least in classical Judaism, there's a notion that we have the access to the divine will because clearly commandments are an expression of divine will, and that precisely because there is such a thing, we are, as human beings, are capable of performing divine will, which is a profound, really profound notion, and that we can try and use our intelligence to analyze what is given to us, so that we have basically the chapter headings, you might say, or the basic principles that are stated explicitly in the Torah, and that by using the intelligence that God has given us, we can then go into the details and the circumstances that surround the actual application of divine will. And here's the other piece about this, all right, is that think about it this way. When you as a human being are performing divine will, you are bringing the presence of God into the world. In a way, this is exactly what angels do. That is the role of angels, in that they don't have any choice in the matter. They are automatically designed to perform the divine will. And human beings, on the other hand, have an opportunity to choose to perform it or not to perform it, which means that if we do, in fact, choose to perform the divine will, that is something that we gain credit for. We are credited for that in a profound kind of way, and quite possibly on a level of earning our immortality. There's a lot that we could say about it, but I'm trying to give you some basic underpinnings as to why this becomes such an important occupation on the part of the Jewish people through its history. And we're accessing, of course, some of it from its origins in the Torah and through Rashi and to some extent Torah Tmima, how this gets played out, so that it isn't just principles, it isn't just fine ideas, but that it actually becomes part of our lives and it becomes part of our daily congress in the world. So that's why, I mean, I'm just trying to express to you why this such an obsession with it. And of course, another way to understand it is, if you were to ask me, what is the most difficult mitzvah of all the mitzvahs, what is the most difficult one? It's the one we say twice a day, which is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That is the most difficult mitzvah. And this is, of course, that's a generality. And all these specifics, even as we sort of walk down the ladder of specificity, or up the ladder if you prefer, however you want to play that metaphor out, we are trying to put some validity and some reality and some basis, some foundation to saying we are trying to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our might.
Well, I guess you're kind of saying that all the other mitzvot are encompassed by that one.
Yes, I would have to say that. Yes, because the love of your fellow human beings, right? If there's this wonderful statement by St. Augustine, I used to have a poster that had this statement by St. Augustine that used to say, what is the love of God? Charity to his children. You can't claim to love God when you cheat God's children and God's creation. So, yeah, let's go into the text. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
We're onto the, guess what? At breakneck speed, we are walking into verse 2. And by the way, I haven't even done all the Torah Tamimas that I was hoping to do, but I want to progress with the Rashi here. We read this verse, right?
Right.
And I think we even did some Rashi on this. We needed to do that, right? And this where Rashi has to determine, what do we mean by a Hebrew slave, right? And we came to the conclusion that it meant a slave who is a Hebrew and who is sold by the court to pay for his theft.
Well,
Okay.
I think we've done
We did that.
both of the big Rashis, and the third one's just like one. I don't even understand why it's even there. It's just translating freedom as freedom.
Well, okay. So again, what exactly that meant? Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I haven't gone to look behind what it means. Well, I think it's sort of I think the idea is that, as we pointed out, that at this point he is fully quit. And not only that, he is completely free. There's no attachments anymore. And maybe that's coming, Rashi's coming to make that very clear. And the truth is that the term chofshi is not so clear. So we have the modern Hebrew word of chofesh, which means vacation. Well, we come back from vacation, right? So it doesn't mean he gets some time off. It means he's saying that this chofshi, this freedom from labor, is entire, it's complete. So I think that's, again, because from a legal standpoint, we tend to look at any possible interpretation and we want to be as clear as we can be. So I do have my marking here. So, and I warned you already that you have to be very open for what's going to happen in a little bit, both from the point of view of how women are handled, okay, and the language that is used with regard to women, and also slavery. Okay, I mean, those two concepts, it's going to take a lot of processing, and it's very easy to push our own sensibilities onto what's being written here, which prevents us from getting to the very end, at which point we can then make our judgments about how valid it is or it isn't, all right? Because there are elements that clearly are not progressive, and yet there are also elements that are amazingly progressive in terms of the treatment of women and the treatment of slavery, some of which is, you look at how women are treated in Afghanistan these days, I mean, in many parts of the world, and you compare it to what the Torah is saying, and it's what Golda has said a few days ago. Please, please, please contextualize what we're saying. So having given you all those warnings, I'm going to go plunge into the text now. So if this stave, im begapo yavo, meaning if he comes in by himself, he simply comes in, he doesn't have, in this case, it means a wife, okay? If he comes in by himself, begapo yetze, he should go out by himself. Going on. Baal ishahu, if he has a wife, if he is the husband of a wife, the yatsa ishto imo, his wife goes out with him. There's going to be a wonderful Rashi on this, and you're going to see, I believe, in this particular case, a certain progressive attitude about slavery here. But remember, he's not really a slave. He is, remember the context of this? This is a man who stole and cannot afford to pay and make compensation for what he stole. And as a result, the court has sold him into servitude to pay off his debt.
So is the reason for that, just out of curiosity, I was wondering this yesterday, is the reason for that because they didn't have like prisons or somewhere to send people, after they had committed crimes, or did they have that concept as well?
Great question. David, not an easy question actually to answer. It doesn't appear that they had a big prison culture. They did have, first of all, remember, they had certain cities of refuge for the manslayer. If it was proved that this person had committed manslaughter, he had to stay in that city. He could not leave the environs of that city. They also had a place where they would sequester individuals who were being accused of a crime prior to being brought to trial. But the truth is, you'll see that they did practice capital punishment. On the other hand, you look at the Talmudic material and you find out that there are incredible protections to actually, because the possibilities of once you've killed someone, you can't bring them back to life if later you find out that it was a mistrial or a misjudgment. So there were all kinds of safety precautions put into that particular system. But it was out there as a potential, possibly, if these things work, and I know there's argumentation over it, as to whether or not it might be a strong disincentive to commit crimes. All right. I mean, this whole issue is a profound issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a related question, but a little more specific. It seems to me that the punishments that you read about sometimes in the Torah are like really closely related to the crime. So it might be, related to the perpetrator and the victim, and some kind of direct you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Compensation, as opposed to like prison, which is an indirect punishment. And I'm not sure that that's true. That's the feeling I'm getting. And it makes me wonder, in these cases, if he's sold into slavery, is he sold to or given into slavery or whatever, but is he given to the person whom he wronged, whom he stole from?
No, I don't think so. But let's say not necessarily. No. Okay. Think of it this way. He has no property to sell. He has nothing. Okay. This is a man who's in deep poverty. The number of times this actually happened is probably relatively rare, where and it was the court. It wasn't the person he stole from. It was done by a court. They would sell him on the slave market, so to speak. That amount of money then would be given to the person he wronged.
Okay.
And he would then become the property for 6 years, right, to the person he was sold for. So again, his value, right, his value, interestingly enough, as you think about it, since it was time bound, right, since he would go completely free after 6 years, this already is a major statement against slavery, right? Because when the slaves were sold in the South, there wasn't a term limit, okay? They were sold in perpetuity. This is already a big step against slavery. And again, part of the concept is, if you're trying to change a culture, everyone here, you all know how difficult it is to change a culture, and you have to do it gradually. So just banning slavery, period, wasn't going to work. People would you can't legislate what people will not accept. That's a basic fundamental principle of law. And we find that, by the way, examples in the Talmud, where the rabbis rescinded a law that they had promulgated because they saw people couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it. It was too much. And there are not a lot of examples, but there are examples. Anyway, let's make sure we can get through the Rashi today, okay? Because there's some questions that this raises. So here we go. Shelo haya nasu isha. So Rashi makes the point that I mentioned before. The point about this is he wasn't married. He wasn't married. Okay, Targumo. And the Targum translates it because it says im bilchodohi. And bilchodohi means by himself. And he's trying to interpret the strange word of gapo. Right? Gapor doesn't mean by himself. It means his wing, okay, or his skirt, as you see here, right? So here we go. Im bilchodohi, if he comes in by himself, single. Velashon gapor. So Rashi still has to explain, why is the Torah using this term, his skirt? bekanfor. So he gives a more common word. Okay, knaf means a wing or a skirt, something that covers you, right? He just comes in with his clothing. Shelo ba ella, because he only comes kamot shehu, just himself, nothing else. He has no property. Because if he had property, they could sell it and pay for his theft that way. Shehu yichidi, okay, because he is single betoch levusho, in his clothing. He only has the clothing on his body, beknaf begado, the clothing on his body, providing him with protection. Begapo,
We have also,
yes,
sorry, we have the word goof. I
yes.
just wanted to say gapo sounds a
true.
little like his
It
body.
does.
That's all he has.
It does. You're right. But then it would, of course, said begufor, right? So
Well, it's related according to Professor Klein. It's related.
yes, I imagine so. Okay, without doing a lot of analysis on that, but yeah, clearly it's got letters in common. But the gapo is sort of an interesting way, and of course, it could have been begufor. It could have been pronounced begufor, right? It's only because that we have this tradition of how the letters are to be pronounced, right? And the tradition said it's pronounced begapo, which would not be begufor.
Well, they're also kind of a little bit opposite. One just his body, one his body is covered.
Well, it just means, I think there's even an English expression that he says, he came in with the shirt he was wearing,
Right.
basically saying that's all he has. He has nothing more but some way to cover himself, right? Clothing, right? Magid. So this tells you, okay, that he goes out by himself. She'im lo haya nasui mitchila, that if he was not married initially, when he was sold into servitude, ein rabo. In this case, it's so interesting because we're going to read about this very unusual situation where his master can give him a Canaanite woman slave. He can give him a Canaanite maidservant. It's not just for his comfort, believe me. It's awful in a way. On the surface, it sounds awful. Basically, because I don't want to anticipate too much, but this is anticipating the fact that if he is single and not married, his master is not allowed to moserlo, is not allowed to provide him shifcha kna'anit, a Canaanite maidservant, leholid mimena avadim, so as to provide from her other slaves. I realize this is sounds very, very primitive, okay? But he was, at least in this situation, he had to be married. He could not, in order for the master to give him, it's so unusual, right? And the idea was that you'll see why, okay? Here we go.
Well, here it says if he was not married, his master may not give him a maidservant.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, only
That's
if he
what I'm
was.
saying. It's, you might think, right? You might think, well, if he's single, then of course his master can give him a woman, can provide the two of them with that relationship. But they're not allowed to according to the Torah, because it's not a marriage. It isn't a marriage. Okay.
Well, it would be self-interest on the part, the master might just want to have some baby slaves. And
that's right. That's the way it comes
he's
out.
not allowed.
Yes.
He's not allowed to do that.
Right.
There's no breeding program.
Well, there is a breeding program, but only if he's already married.
Right.
It is.
But,
Okay.
okay. Even I think when I was reading Rambam, something about slaves aren't really free to marry
No. They're
at all. I mean, if he's going out when he leaves with only the shirt on his back,
Yes. Let's
that
yeah.
means he's poor again. So he's got, that's not a great.
No,
way to start.
wait. We'll see about
Okay.
that. We'll see about that. Okay, there are other places where it talks about slavery, and essentially it says that, I believe, and it applies to any Hebrew who's sold into servitude. He goes out with some benefits. Okay, he does. But that's in another place. I don't think we're going to deal with it here. And unfortunately, it's not like I've read all this Torah Tamima, had time to study all this Torah Tamima, and can tell you, no, he's going to deal with it, etc., etc. We'd have to plow through it together. And you could see how many hours one could spend on this, just trying to figure, just verse at a time. Let's go on, please. Imbal Ishahu. So if he is married, right? Yisraelit, meaning if he's married to a Jewish woman, okay, he's married to an Israelite woman. The Yatzah Ishto, this is, I think, great. Imor, his wife should go out with him. And Rashi says, V'chi mi hichnisa. Wait a second, he says, since when did she become a slave? He was sold to pay for his theft. Who said she became a slave? Nobody said that. The Torah didn't say that. So how come should they say that she's going out? She's been setting free? I mean, that implies that she was a slave to begin with, and never said it was. Ella. So how do we understand this? Magid HaKatuv, that scripture is telling us, Shehakoneh Eved Ivri, that one who purchases, who acquires a Hebrew slave, Chayav b'mezonot ishto, he is required, he is obligated to provide food for his wife, for the slave's wife, Uvanav, and his children. There's a statement, by the way, in the Talmud that says, one who acquires a slave acquires a master. Because there are all kinds of obligations you have. So look, please, I mean, given all the stuff that kind of makes our hairs, bristle in what we're going to read, also please take into account the thought that's going in for when this was being promulgated, okay, and the discussions about how this gets interpreted in terms of the humane treatment of slaves. Now,
I don't think we're as easily shocked as you think we are. Nobody here seems shocked.
Well, either
Yeah.
shocked into silence or I'm the one who's shocked. Okay, it's okay. I mean,
Okay.
all right, let's keep going a little. If that's okay, I want to go on. All right, let's take another verse. Here we go. Im Adonav yiten lo isha. If his master should give him a wife, a woman, right? V'yalda lo vanim uvanot, and she gives birth to him, sons or daughters. Ha'isha v'ladeha tiyeh la'adoneha. The woman and her children belong to her master. Vahu yetze berapo, and he goes out single. Okay. So you were anticipating that because I was telling you, right? So here we go. Im Adonav yiten lo isha, if his master gives him a woman, mikan, from this shaharashut biyad rabo, we learn from this that his master has permission. It's not that we're saying his master should, we're just saying his master has the permission, limsor lo shivcha kna'anit, to transfer to him, to give to him a Canaanite maidservant, leholid mimena avadim, to give birth to provide from her slaves. Okay, then it's a possibility. Look at this. He's going to say, well, wait a second. O eino ella beYisraelit. Wait a second. Who says it's a Canaanite maidservant? Maybe it's a Jewish woman. Maybe it's an Israelite woman that he can do this with. Talmud lomar ha'isha v'yiladeha tiyeh la'adoneha. That's why scripture says the woman and her children shall be for her masters. Ha'eino medaber. For this reason, it cannot be speaking except ella b'kna'anit. It can only be talking about a Canaanite maidservant. Shahare ha'ivriya, because with regards to the Israelite woman, afi yotz'a b'sheish, she too goes out after 6 years. V'afilu lifnei sheish, and also possibly before the 6 years. Im hevia simanim, if she shows incipient signs of puberty. yotz'ah, he has to set her free. Shene'emar, because it says in Deuteronomy, achicha ha'ivri ho'avriya, because there where it's talking about servitude, it says your brother, the Israelite, or the Israelitess. Melamed, it teaches you, she'af ha'ivriya yotz'ah b'shesh, that the Israelite woman also goes out after 6 years. So since an Israelite woman is also let go after a maximum of 6 years of servitude, it cannot be the case here that they're talking about an Israelite woman that he's giving to breed slaves for himself. Now, this still begs a question about what we mean by an Eved Knaani, okay? It's sort of it's almost a contradiction in terms, because they were supposed to go out and expunge the Canaanites. They were supposed to go in and expunge the Canaanites. And they didn't. They did not do it. And of course, this is another, very, very hard piece of information to work with in this whole idea of genocide when they went in to conquer the land of Canaan. It's a huge moral issue. But anyway, they didn't. I mean, in the book of Joshua, we see they actually didn't do it. So there's something going on here that I don't necessarily have my finger on. But it says Eved Knaani, and of course, is that a generalized statement to speak of? Is it saying non-Jewish slaves, non-Israelite slaves? Is that what they mean by Eved Knaani, or are they being more specific? So I do not have an answer for you right now. Have to look up the whole concept, and I suspect there may well be debate over that particular issue. So so we have a lovely circumstance that the Torah is going to bring in next time we meet. We'll go to verse Hey, and I'm going to mark it so we know where to start. And I want to give you a chance. I'm going to stop the share and give you a chance to comment. All right. In the few minutes that we have remaining, I'm interested in hearing your reactions. You still have to process this, or do you have some reactions?
Not really. I mean, the little bit that you just hit about puberty. Yes. That was a little interesting. But who was he letting go at? Just the Hebrew slave.
Yes.
Was going. Yes.
Okay. There was a situation.
Signs of puberty. Okay.
Right. So that implies that she had to be a minor when she was sold into slavery. There were circumstances, tragic circumstances, where a family was so poor that the father had the right to take his minor daughter and sell her as a maidservant. The Torah in our Parsha is going to talk about how she is treated. Okay? Okay. There was but the point is that according to halacha, the moment she had to be a minor, the moment she started, in other words, she would have been under 12, right? Had she started to show signs of puberty, she had to be released. Had to be released. You did not have, so the only situation, it doesn't appear, at least from what we're saying now, that a mature woman could be sold into slavery. She could enter a slave situation in terms of being married to her husband who was sold into slavery. But it doesn't, at least from the information we have here, appear, if we take into account everything Rashi is saying, that you could actually, that a mature woman could be sold into slavery for a theft. It only apply to men. Now, I'm saying that tentatively, you understand. I'm not saying that as hard information, but I'm saying that appears to be an inference to be drawn from what we're reading. And I see Lee, and I want to
Good
thank.
morning.
Good morning.
I had my first vaccine